Hello, I'm Susan Bean, here to teach you something about Photoshop layers. Um, in previous videos, we organized the desktop and streamlined it. And tonight, we're really going to dive into Photoshop. Usually, before I dive into Photoshop, I do some um, basic tonal adjustments on things either in Lightroom or in Camera Raw. And I'll do videos about those, but, and I probably should have started with those, but frankly, this is more fun. And I just wanted to start where I started. So I have a photo open in Photoshop. As you can see, it's my dear friend from college, Ezra, that I've known for a million years. And like any photo that you open for the first time in Photoshop, if we look over at the layers, and we are going to look over at the layers way over on the right side of the screen, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see this a little better. There we go. You can see that it only has one layer, and that layer is automatically named background. And it has a little lock symbol. That's because background layers are kind of special layers. They have all these rules that the other layers don't have to obey. For example, you can't use the move tool and move this around. And you can't have any transparent areas in this layer. That's okay. We have ways around this. It's not a problem. But when you first open a picture, you will not have more than one layer. All right, let's get out of there for a minute and let's make some layers. So there are little icons at the bottom of the layers panel. And one of them is a little trash can. That's for throwing away layers you don't want or need. And let me get this off here. And the one right next to it, the little icon right next to it, is a tiny square. Again, occasionally I'm gonna zoom in. It's kind of obnoxious for a minute, but then if we're patient, you can see better. All right, the right next to the trash can is the little square with a plus in it. That icon is does two things. It's for making a blank new layer. If I just click on that, it makes a blank new layer. Or if I drag a different existing layer over that and hover over it, let go, it copies that layer. So it's new and copy. All right, so let's try that. Here's the background layer. I'm going to click and hold down and nothing happens. Pull it down and I'm going to hover over that little box that I just showed you and let go. And voila, now I have a layer that's named background copy. So that's one way of getting layers in your pictures. I do that really often because I don't want to work on the background layer. It's my original pixels, and I don't want to do anything that would be destructive to them. All right, I always name layers. It's really good habit to get into, even though they automatically name that one for me. I like to call things what they are, and so I double click on the name of the layer. Not, I kind of actually double click gently, and it highlights, and I can now just type in. I'm going to type in retouch because that's usually what I do. I make a copy of the original layer, and then if I want to retouch, part of the thing that's fun about it is I can see the before and after by toggling the retouch layer off and on, and I can see the difference that I've made in retouching. We'll do that another time. He doesn't need any retouching right now, but I did want to show you how to make a copy of a layer. Now I'm going to go and click on that same icon, just click, and now I've made a brand new blank layer, and it's called layer 1, and I'm going to name it immediately. Let me show you what happens if you click too aggressively. I'm going to just double click so I can rename it. But if you click too hard, you get this annoying box. It does wonderful things way later. It will do wonderful things. Right now, way too much information. So if this pops out, just patiently cancel or okay, either one's fine, and it will go away. Now let's double click less aggressively, click, and it highlights, and I can name this painting because I'm going to paint on it. So I now have a retouch layer and a painting layer, and we're having some layers, and you can't really tell anything because it just looks like the same old picture. I'm going to use a tool that we haven't used yet, but we did learn the shortcut for it in previous videos, and it's the brush tool. And you can probably guess, even if you didn't see those videos, that one letter shortcut for that tool is B for brush. So I typed it, I look way over at the tools, and there's the brush is selected, and I'm looking at the settings for it. The opacity is 100%. That's all good. And I'm going to paint. Let's see, I'll paint glasses on him. So, and I'm painting on the painting layer, and I can tell because if I look over in the layers, it's highlighted. All right, I painted. This is why I'm a photographer, not a painter. If I go over, if I now go to the move tool, remember the shortcut for the move tool? It's move V. There's the move tool. If I go to the move tool, I can move this painting layer. And now you can start seeing that that might be kind of a cool thing to have different layers, because I can paint, but I can modify that, and it doesn't interfere with my original layer. I'm going to look over at the layers, and you'll notice that there's a tiny little eyeball right near each layer. Let's look at what that does. Here's the painting layer. If I click on the eyeball, click again, it toggles the visibility of the layer on and off. So that's what that eyeball does. It's a toggle switch for visibility. Now, if I wanted to change the opacity of this layer, I could go, it says opacity way up here, and it's really tiny. Again, I'm going to try this zooming in thing. I think it's kind of obnoxious, but it's effective. There's the opacity. And there's something called fill. We'll get to that later. That's very important. Most people, even people who know Photoshop pretty well, have no idea what that does. And actually, it's super powerful. So we'll talk about that. But right now, let's talk about opacity. So there's a way that you can change the opacity. And then there's another way you can change the opacity. And they're both kind of lousy. And there's a really good way you can change the opacity. So we're going to do the good way. The lousy way is to see where it says 100%. You can click on the little arrow, and then you get a slider, and then you can slide it. And you can see the glasses are changing opacity. You can see they're not 100% anymore. That's the lousy way to do it. Second lousy way is to hover your cursor over the word opacity, hold down, and move it side to side to change the opacity. This is also bad because it's hard on your wrist, it's hard on your hand. And I mean, you're not going to be injured, but if you have trouble with using the computer a lot, it can be a problem. So the good way is to go to the move tool by typing move, type V. And once you're on the move tool doesn't have an opacity setting of its own. So other tools, you can type numbers and change the tool opacity, but this tool doesn't have opacity. So when you type numbers, it changes the opacity of the active selected layer. So if I type 5, suddenly the opacity of that layer is changed to 50%. If I type 3, 30%. If I type 0, it's back to 100%. Here's 8 for 80, 5 for 50, 2 for 20, 0 back to 100. So that's a really efficient way of changing the opacity of a layer. All right. So we've named the layers. We've turned the eyeball of visibility on and off. We've changed the opacity of a layer. And now we're going to go and do a few other things. One thing worth mentioning is that you probably noticed when I was way zoomed in that this layer that I drew on has a checkerboard, a gray and white checkerboard on it. That's Adobe's way, Photoshop's way of showing you that there's a transparent area. Anything that's checkerboard is transparent. It doesn't print. If I printed this out right now, you would not see a checkerboard. And in fact, you don't see a checkerboard on the actual photograph. It's just Adobe's way. They had to figure out a way of showing you something was clear. And that's how they do it. So that's what checkerboard means. And there we go. All right. One other thing about the Move tool. The Move tool, we're on the Move tool right now, and it has a setting. Right now the setting is Auto Select, and that's checked. And we're going to keep that checked right now, because right now it'll be your best friend if it's checked. Later we'll see why you wouldn't want that checked all the time. All right, so I have different documents open. They're visible in little tabs above my work area. And I'm going to go to this second photo. Oh, I'm going to show you how to get rid of a layer so we can get rid of these glasses. And then we'll go to the other example. All right, I don't want this painting layer anymore. So I drag it to the trash can, let go, and now it's gone. If I save this right now as a Photoshop document or a TIFF, when I open it again, these layers will still be, any layers that are showing when I save it will still be here, and I'll still be able to work on them and do stuff to them. If I save it as a JPEG, the layers will combine into one background layer, and I will not be able to use the layers in that if I open that JPEG in Photoshop again. So we'll talk more about that. All right, here is a photograph I made specifically to teach layers. I cut out some things. That's the next skill that we'll learn after layers. I cut out some things and I copied them and pasted them into this document. When you do copy and paste, as soon as you paste into a Photoshop document, it automatically pastes the thing that you're pasting onto its own new layer. And if it doesn't fill the whole layer, then there's checkerboard, there's transparent areas. So if you notice on this picture, we have several layers. You can have hundreds of layers, by the way. It makes for big file size, but people do it. That's one of the many reasons it's so important to name the layers, because if you have a lot of layers and these thumbnails are small, it's hard to tell what is on which layer, and it gets overwhelming. So we're going to name these, and I always think it's a good idea to name things what they are. So if I use the move tool and it's clicked on auto select and I click on this tower, I can move this, and this obviously is a tower. So I'm going to gently click twice and name this tower. And then I'm going to go to this layer and I'm going to name this guy. And then this layer, instead of layer 2, which isn't very helpful in terms of trying to tell what you're doing, I'm going to name this leaf. And I'm going to name this pear. So be sure you name layers, what they are. And now we're going to look at something called stacking order. You notice the pear is in front of the guy. If I move it around using the move tool, it's in front of the leaf, it's in front of the tower, it's in front of the room. That's because it's in the top, in the layers panel, it's the top one. The layers panel goes in order. The things at the top of the list are in front of other things that are lower on the list. So if I move the tower and I'm just clicking and holding down and dragging it, and a little blue line comes out, and wherever that blue line is, when I drop it, it'll drop it there. So now the tower is still below the pear, but it's now in front of the leaf and the guy. All right, now I want the guy to be in front of everything. So I click and hold down, and I just drag that layer to the top of the list. And now he's in front. So this is called the stacking order. And it's very easy to change. You want something in front, you just drag it further up the list. I want that leaf to be in front of him. I drag it above him on the list. There, oh, he looks much better with a hat. Okay, so that's called stacking order. It's very straightforward. And it's very important. We talked about troubleshooting, and quick review. The first thing you do when you're troubleshooting is you make sure you're on the right tool. Then you make sure that the settings on the tool are what you want or nothing weird. And then the next part of troubleshooting is coming over to the layers and looking at the layers and making sure you're on the right layer and the stacking order is correct. A lot of times people will do something, for example, they'll be making changes to the guy, and they don't see any changes, and they don't see any changes, and it's because they're on the leaf layer, and the changes they're making are happening on the leaf layer. So layers are a really good place to come when you are stuck and you need to troubleshoot. Look what layers you have and try to figure out what you're actually looking at and what you're working on. All right, so we've changed the stacking order and we've moved things around. And there's one more layer that has a mysterious name. It's called varnish. and its eyeball is off, and that's why we're not seeing it. And I'm going to turn it on now. And everything got kind of weird and dark. And now I'm gonna fix it. So this varnish layer is on top of everything, and now it's hiding everything. You can't see anything. I could change the opacity. Remember how to do that? I would type V for the move tool, and then I would type a number like 5 for 50%. Now we can see through it. Do this. But I'm going to put it back here because I want to show you um, something about the move tool using this layer. Above all these layers is a little field that says normal. We saw that with a tool the other day where it said normal, and I made some joke about it. But whenever you see the word normal, that's a very special list of what are called blending modes. And hard to describe, but let's look at them. Here's the list. Normal is the default. And normal means things look the way you expect them to look. But this next group makes things darker in different ways. You can see. Multiply. I have my own names for these. This multiply is darker and richer. Color burn, that's a pretty good name. And then the next group makes things lighter. I call that one bleach. And then the next group changes the contrast of things. So overlay, I'm going to do soft light. And I'll just go down and show you. There's my name for this one is Andy Warhol. Difference makes things the opposite colors. Hue, saturation. So this list looks kind of weird and makes things kind of weird looking, but there are important things that you'll end up doing with it eventually, probably. I'm going to put this on soft light, and when I turn this layer on now and off, you can see that it kind of makes things more dimensional and richer. And if you have seen my work or other people's work where they use a lot of textures in Photoshop, this is how it's done. You bring in a texture on its own layer and you change its blending mode. And usually for textures, it ends up being on the blending mode called soft light. Not always, but often. This looks better with the overlay. All right, so those are blending modes. Now, the reason I wanted to show you this, aside from showing you blending modes, is that if you remember, we were using the move tool and we changed a setting and we checked auto select. I'm going to turn this varnish off for a minute. And auto select was great because if we came over here and clicked on the leaf, it intuitively chose the leaf layer to be active and I could move the leaf. And if I clicked on the pear, well then the pear would be the active layer. And the move tool is automatically figuring out what layer I'm talking about when I click on it. So auto select is great. It's my best friend. It helps the move tool to be intuitive, and I don't have to keep going up and clicking the layers because it just gets which layer should be the active layer automatically. However, if I have auto select on with a move tool and I have a subtle layer that's kind of not an object and I click, it picks the varnish layer, and that's the varnish layer. And I didn't really want to move that. I wanted to move the guy. Now I just want to move the leaf. No, it picks the varnish layer. I want to move the tower. Nah, varnish. So you can see that it's not always your best friend on the move tool. And in fact, in cases like this where I have a texture, it's really annoying. So I'm going to come up here to the options for the move tool, and I'm going to uncheck auto select. And now if I click on the leaf layer manually here, if I want to move the leaf, I move the leaf. If I want to move the guy, I just have to come over here and click on the guy, and I can move the guy or the tower or any of the things that are there. I can't move the room because it's the background layer, and background layers can't be moved. So it's staying put. If I copy that layer, then I can move the copy around and move the room. If I rename the background layer, I could move it and the lock will come off. But I generally don't do that because, again, it's my original pixels. I don't really want to make permanent changes in them. I'd rather do things with copies of it and other layers. So that's the story on auto select and the move tool. It's a wonderful thing until it's not. All right, one more thing, and then I think I'm going to break up teaching about layers into several shorter videos because I think it gets to be too much. So we'll do one more thing, and it's a fun thing. When things are on separate layers, when things are on separate layers, you can move them around. You can also transform them. There's a whole bunch of things. You can, for example, if I wanted this leaf to be facing the opposite direction, or if I wanted the pear to be bigger, or if I wanted to distort the guy and make him all wacky looking. These are called transformations, and you can do them to one layer at a time or several layers at the same time. Um, let's see. I like to show this using the guy because he was during a show that I entered years ago, and he was dating my boss, and my boss broke up with him, and I didn't get in the show. So I was very bitter, and now I just take revenge by doing horrible things to him in Photoshop. I hope he doesn't watch this. Okay, so I have a layer selected. I'm going to select the guy, and the long way is to go up to the edit menu and do free transform. However, it's showing me that there's a shortcut there, and it's a really pretty easy shortcut to remember, so I'm going to say it. It's on a Mac, it's Command T. On a PC, it's Control T. And the way I remember it is Command Transform or Control Transform. So it puts this thing called a bounding box around anything that's not transparent on that layer. And if I pull, I can make him bigger, make him smaller. I can still drag him around. And if I put my cursor somewhere just outside the bounding box, like this, you can see it immediately turns into a double-headed arrow. And when it is a double-headed arrow, you can hold down and rotate. So you can scale, which is another name for resizing, and you can rotate. And you can see it's pivoting from a central point just below his nose. That's the pivot point. But I can drag that even outside the bounding box. And now when I move my cursor outside the bounding box, I can rotate from that pivot point. Okay. Now, there's a whole list of other things you can do, and you access that list by, if you have a mouse, or a way to do this on a trackpad or with a stylus, you you right click. If you don't have a right click on your computer, on a Mac, you hold the control key, not the command key, the control key, and you click and you get what's called a contextual menu. By the way, on a Mac, this works for almost anything on your computer. When you want a little menu with extra stuff, if you click on a folder or you click on something on your desktop or a file, the same thing works. You hold the control key and click, and you get a related menu, a contextual menu. All right, so I can scale. We already scaled just by dragging it by the corners. I can rotate. We did that. But, oh, we haven't skewed or distorted yet. Let's try perspective. This is good if you have an architectural photograph and you copy the layers so you can transform something, and you can change the perspective. It's good with architecture, but it's even more fun when you want to make people into giant worms because they've done you wrong. All right, so I can play with that by pulling on the edges. I can right click, control click again, or right click. I can go to warp, even bad case of the mumps. All kinds of fun things. And I can also, I'm going to get that menu again. I can also flip horizontal and flip vertical. Those are used a lot, or rotate a set amount. So flip horizontal, he's facing the other way. Flip vertical. Imagine what you can do to family photos. All right, so when you have a bounding box and you're doing all these transformations, I can't drag them down now. I'm going to hit, I want to get out of this because I've gone too far and it's getting even weirder than I had planned. So I'm going to hit the escape key, and that will get me out of this and put him back to the way he was. When you have a bounding box, when you do some transformation, it won't let you, Photoshop won't let you go on to the next thing you want to do until you say either yes, do it, or no, escape, forget it. So I'm going to get a bounding box again, Command transform. And this time I'm just going to, I had my fun. I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm just going to flip vertical. And the way you say yes or no is way up here. The little check mark is yes, or the little circle with a slash through it is no. Or you can just hit enter on a PC or return on a Mac for yes. Or you can hit escape for no. So I will hit enter, and I'm going to undo that. I can go in history and go before I did that. And that's how you transform. If I want to transform more than one layer at a time, I can, now I selected the leaf layer and the tower layer and the pear layer. Let's just do the leaf and the pear. I did that by holding the command or control key, and it lets you select more than one layer at a time. And now I'll do transform, command transform, or control transform. The bounding box is bigger because I'm transforming several things, and now you can see that it will do several things at a time. You can rotate. All right, so I want more than one leaf. So here's the leaf. if I drag it to the copy button, I don't see a second leaf. Why is that? Because it's right on top of the other leaf. I just have to move it. And now I can transform it, Command or Control T, and get the contextual menu and flip horizontal. There, so you can start to play with this. I'll show you how to cut things out really soon, but if you're impatient, the Object Select tool, once you get pink, if you click, that thing is cut out. And if you do copy and then paste, so I'll edit, I do it the long way, but usually I do it with shortcuts. Copy, edit, paste. It automatically made another layer. I would name it third leaf and go to the move tool, V. Now I have a third leaf. Each one is on its own layer. And there we go. So that's the beginning of layers. They're very powerful and fun. And we'll do some more with layers in the next video. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing, those of you that did. That was exciting. And I'll keep posting one every day. All right, that's the plan. Thank you.